The room was dimly lit, shadows curling into the corners like silent watchers. I sat alone, fingers trembling over the keyboard, the glow of the screen illuminating the lines of the manuscript I had poured my soul into for months. Tonight was supposed to be the night, the launch, the unveiling of a dream finally taking shape. The anticipation thrummed in my chest, a steady rhythm that promised hope and fulfillment. But then, as if swallowed by the darkness itself, the pages vanished. One moment the words were there, vivid and alive. The next, an unbearable emptiness stared back at me from the screen's blank canvas. It wasn't just the loss of text, it was a void that swallowed the air from the room, a silence so deep it pressed against my eardrums. My breath hitched, heart pounding against ribs that suddenly felt too tight. I reached out, fingers searching, but the manuscript was gone, as if erased by some unseen hand. The weight of absence settled over me like a shroud, thick and suffocating. Outside, the night pressed in, a heavy curtain of black mirroring the shadow that had crept into my soul. The city's distant lights flickered dimly, powerless against the consuming dark. I felt frozen, caught between disbelief and despair, unable to move, as if the very air had congealed around me. My mind raced, desperate to piece together what had happened, but the thoughts tangled and slipped away like smoke through my fingers. There was no frantic scramble, no sudden surge to fix the loss, only a paralyzing stillness that gripped me from within. This was no ordinary fear. It was a creeping paralysis that seeped into every fiber of my being. Doubt whispered cruel lies, winding tight around my thoughts, choking the courage that had carried me this far. Confusion blurred the edges of reality, and a haunting sense of loss tugged at the core of my purpose. I wanted to scream, to cry out to the empty room, but my voice was swallowed by the silence. My hands lay limp in my lap, disconnected from the urgency that screamed inside me. As the minutes stretched endlessly, I felt the cold grip of fear deepen. It was not the sharp sting of panic but a slow, insidious freeze that halted every impulse to act. The absence of my work was more than a surface wound. It felt like a fracture in the foundation of who I was and what I was meant to do. Questions churned relentlessly beneath the surface. Was I worthy? Was my calling just a fragile illusion? Had everything I believed in crumbled in an instant? Yet beneath the suffocating weight of despair, a faint flicker stirred, soft and fragile, like a candle struggling against the wind. It whispered that this moment was more than a mere accident, that this void was not random but a battleground. The enemy was not just the loss itself but something darker, more deliberate. It felt as if an unseen force had reached out to sever the threads of my mission, to silence the voice I was meant to share. The fear was not just external. It was a spiritual assault aimed at the heart of my calling. I closed my eyes, the blackness behind my lids thick and unyielding. The room seemed to contract, pressing in on me. But within that pressure, I sensed something else. A quiet presence, a gentle nudge beneath the weight of doubt. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it held a promise. This paralysis was not the end but a threshold. The darkness was a veil, concealing a deeper truth that would soon be revealed. The battle was real, but so was the hope that whispered beneath the fear. Minutes passed like hours, each one stretching the silence taut. I remained still, caught in the liminal space between despair and faith. The manuscript's absence echoed like a hollow drum in the vast chamber of my heart, but that fragile flicker persisted, a soft glow in the shadows. It was an invitation, a challenge to look beyond the shattered surface and confront the unseen forces at work. The paralysis held me captive, yet within its grip, a subtle transformation began. The fear, though heavy and suffocating, was not without purpose. It was a crucible, refining the edges of my resolve even as it threatened to consume me. I realized that this stillness was not mere resignation, but a silent battlefield where faith would soon rise to meet fear. The room remained cold, the silence thick and unyielding, but I sat there, anchored by that faint whisper of hope. Though my hands trembled and my heart ached under the weight of loss, I knew this night was not the end of the story. It was the dark before dawn, the pause before the first step forward. The shadow that loomed was real, and its presence undeniable, but so was the stirring of something greater. A quiet strength waiting to be claimed beyond the paralysis. I opened my eyes, staring into the empty space where my dreams had vanished, and in that void, I found not surrender but a fragile seed of resistance. The fear was heavy, the silence deep, But I was still here. Still breathing. Still waiting for the light to break through. The silence in the room stretched on, heavy and unyielding, yet beneath its weight, a subtle shift began to take shape. The paralysis that had once gripped me with icy fingers now felt less like a prison and more like a pause, a necessary stillness before movement. I sat motionless, eyes tracing the empty space where my manuscript had been, and slowly, understanding seeped into the corners of my mind. This freezing fear, this suffocating quiet, was not a sign of defeat but a natural response to an unseen assault, a defense mechanism triggered by forces beyond the surface. I felt a stirring within me, fragile yet persistent, as if a veil were being lifted to reveal a hidden landscape beneath the despair. The loss was not random, nor was the paralysis a mere lapse in courage. It was a moment of spiritual testing, a crucible designed to prepare me for what lay ahead. The enemy was not simply the absence of words on a page, but a spiritual adversary wielding fear and confusion as weapons, seeking to derail the calling I had been entrusted to fulfill. In this quiet revelation I sensed a presence, gentle but unmistakable, illuminating the enemy's tactics. Fear was not an enemy to be crushed in haste. It was a tool used to cloud vision and stall progress. Confusion, like a dense fog, sought to obscure purpose and breed self-doubt. These were not random afflictions but deliberate assaults aimed at breaking resolve. The realization was both sobering and clarifying. The paralysis was a signpost of spiritual warfare, a call to stand firm rather than yield. I opened my eyes wider, breathing deeper, allowing this new perspective to settle. The room felt less cold, the silence less oppressive. With each breath, the grip of fear loosened, replaced gradually by a quiet courage that stirred like a flame rekindling from embers long thought dead. My heart, once heavy with despair, began to pulse with a tentative resolve. The paralysis was still present, but it was no longer a shackle. It had become a threshold, a sacred space where faith could rise to meet doubt. A gentle warmth spread through me, an unspoken encouragement that felt like a hand resting lightly on my shoulder, steadying and reassuring. This presence was not of my own making but something greater, an invitation to align with a source of strength beyond myself. It whispered that I was not alone in this fight, that guidance and protection surrounded my calling even in the darkest moments. The enemy's tactics were exposed, and with that exposure came the power to resist. The swirling confusion began to clear, replaced by a sharper focus. I saw the fear for what it was, a signal, a warning that my mission mattered deeply, and that the enemy's resistance was a testament to its significance. This insight shifted the landscape within me. No longer was I a victim of circumstance. I was a participant in a larger battle, armed not with weapons of flesh but with faith and discernment. The paralysis began to fracture, subtle cracks forming in the walls of doubt. My hands, once limp and disconnected, stirred with a new energy, as if awakening from a long slumber. Thoughts that had been tangled and lost now began to align, forming a clarity that felt almost sacred. The fear had not disappeared, but it had lost its power to immobilize. Instead, it became a backdrop against which courage could grow more vivid, more real. I leaned back, eyes closed briefly, allowing this transformation to root deeper. The enemy's assault was real, but so was the divine presence that countered it. The silence in the room was no longer empty but charged with possibility. It was a space where fear and faith met, where paralysis could be met with prayer and purpose. I felt a quiet defiance rising within, a readiness to face the darkness with eyes open and heart steady. This encounter with fear as a spiritual weapon changed everything. It reframed the paralysis from a place of shame or failure into a sacred moment of preparation. I understood now that every pause, every moment of doubt, was an invitation to draw closer to the source of my calling, to seek strength beyond myself. The enemy sought to isolate and weaken me, but in this revelation, I found connection and empowerment. The room, once a chamber of despair, began to feel like a sanctuary, a place where the battle was acknowledged but not yet decided. The tension in my body eased, replaced by a stillness that was not submission but readiness. I felt the presence of a community beyond the walls, a spiritual fellowship that stood with me even in the silence. This invisible circle offered support and solidarity, reminding me that overcoming paralysis was not a solitary journey. I opened my eyes again, seeing the space anew. The manuscript was still gone, the loss still real, but the landscape of my soul had shifted. Fear and confusion were no longer tyrants but messengers, their voices diminished by the light of understanding. I recognized that this moment, though painful, was a necessary passage, a refining fire that would forge resilience and reveal true strength. The paralysis, once a wall, was now a door waiting to be opened. Through it lay the path forward, illuminated not by certainty but by faith. I reached out tentatively, ready to step beyond the silence into the movement that awaited. This was not the end of the story but the beginning of a deeper journey, one where fear and faith would dance, and where the enemy's tactics could be met with unwavering resolve. The quiet presence that had settled over me whispered again, a soft but steady encouragement to trust, to stand firm, to rise. The enemy's attack had been unveiled, and in the unveiling its power diminished. The paralysis remained, but it was no longer a prison. It was a sacred pause, a spiritual testing ground where courage would be born anew. I breathed deeply, feeling the stirring of hope beneath the shadow, and prepared to move forward, guided by a strength greater than fear. The darkness that had once felt so suffocating began to recede, not with a sudden burst but through a gentle unfolding, like dawn's first light spreading across a restless sky. I rose from the stillness that had held me captive, each movement cautious yet purposeful, as if stepping out of a thick fog into clearer air. The paralysis that had once gripped my limbs loosened its hold, replaced by a quiet strength that radiated from deep within, a strength not my own, but drawn from a source unseen yet deeply felt. The emptiness left by the vanished manuscript no longer echoed with despair but hummed with potential. It was a blank space waiting to be filled, a canvas for new beginnings forged through resilience and faith. The fear that had threatened to consume me was now tempered by an awareness that my calling was protected, guided by a hand greater than mine. I felt the weight of isolation lift, replaced by a connection to something larger, a divine presence that steadied my heart and sharpened my vision. Prayer became my refuge, a steady rhythm that aligned my spirit with hope and purpose. Words whispered in the quiet hours wove a tapestry of faith around me, each breath a thread binding me to the strength I needed. In those moments I felt the power of surrender, not as defeat, but as an act of trust, a deliberate choice to lean into the mystery of divine timing and guidance. The paralysis was no longer a barrier but a gateway, inviting me to step forward with courage born of spiritual alignment. Beyond the solitude of my room, I sensed the embrace of a faith community, a circle of souls bound by shared belief and mutual encouragement. Their unseen presence wrapped around me like a shield, a collective resilience that fortified my resolve. This network of support was a testament to the truth that overcoming fear is not solely an individual battle, but a communal victory. Their prayers, their stories, their unwavering faith became a chorus that lifted me beyond the shadows. With each passing moment, the vision of relaunching my manuscript grew clearer, no longer a distant dream but an imminent reality. The journey ahead would undoubtedly be fraught with challenges, but I was no longer alone or unarmed. The fear that had once immobilized me was transformed into fuel for action, its energy redirected toward purpose and determination. I felt a fierce resolve kindling within, a readiness to claim my place and share the gifts that had been entrusted to me. I reached for my laptop, fingers steadying as they hovered above the keys. The blank screen no longer intimidated but invited. A fresh start, an open door. The story that had vanished would return, not as a fragile echo of what was lost, but as a testament to perseverance and divine purpose. The light in the room brightened, the shadows retreating with each keystroke that followed. Movement replaced stillness, hope eclipsed fear. As I typed, the presence of the community remained palpable, a steady heartbeat beneath the surface of my resolve. I was reminded that vulnerability and courage walk hand in hand, and that seeking support is a strength, not a weakness. The shared journey of faith empowered me, grounding me in the truth that I am part of a greater whole, a tapestry woven with resilience and grace. The manuscript began to take shape once more, each word a declaration of triumph over the paralysis that had threatened to define me. The battle against fear was far from over, but I no longer faced it alone or unprepared. The divine strength that had carried me through the darkest night now propelled me into the light, illuminating the path ahead with clarity and purpose. In this moment, I understood that the greatest breakthroughs often come after the fiercest battles. The paralysis was not an end but a passage, a refining fire that had purified my resolve and deepened my faith. The journey forward was a testament to the power of trust, community, and spiritual alignment. I sat upright, heart steady, eyes bright, ready to embrace the abundant life waiting just beyond the fear.